Welcome to the St Andrew's Debating Society, the oldest and some might say finest of its kind.
Yeah.
The motion that stands before the House this evening is this House opposes marriage. We are joined by some excellent speakers tonight, Professor Lynn Jamieson on the proposition side and Dr. Chia Liu on the opposition side. Before we begin the debate, I invite the training officer to read last week's minutes in the style of the hit 2018 film Marriage Story.
Every day I wake up and I hope you're dead! You're such a dick!
Point. I never thought that a white man could play Scarlett Johansson. But then again, she did do such a good job of playing an Asian woman, so...
There seems to be some disagreement in the House. We'll have to take a vote by oral acclamation. Ooh. All those in favour of taking the minutes as read say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Seems rather close, so I must consult with my Sergeant at Arms.
Aye.
The minutes are taken as read.
Resign.
Without any further ado, I give the call to the proposition speaker to give their address defending the motion that stands in their name. Hear, hear.
This House opposes marriage. I want to, first of all, get you to think about what marriage is. So I am opposing marriage, not lifelong relationships, not love, not commitment, nor civil partnerships, but marriage. Marriage is a legal arrangement. It is a legal arrangement that's been extended from heterosexual couples. Originally, it was only possible for a man and a woman to marry, to same-sex relationships. So you can have a marriage of two husbands, a marriage of two wives. As long as they're both over 16 in Scotland, they may marry as long as they're not in prohibited other relationships like father and son, as long as they are not married to someone else. Now, marriage has an incredible bad baggage, and part of my argument is that that baggage still goes with it. And try as we might, it's still mired in patriarchy. Patriarchy literally meaning rule of the father, rule of the husband, and now often used to mean subordination of women, inequality between men and women, something looser like that. Marriage was, of course, historically an arrangement where a father exchanged a daughter to a husband. The husband had complete ownership. All of her property was then his. She could do very little without his permission. And she was legally, financially, utterly dependent, and so on. Now, we've come a long way from that, obviously, but marriage still carries a lot of that baggage. And the way that people marry still often symbolises that. The walking down the aisle with the father handing over the bride to the groom, the changing of the name, the woman more consistently wearing the ring than the man, showing the belonging, the property. In 1884, Frederick Engels wrote The Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State. And in that work, that 19th century work, he said the difference between a courtesan, meaning a prostitute, and a married woman is that the courtesan sells herself by the hour. The married woman sells herself for a lifetime. So in Engels' time, it was about the passing on of private property. It was about an arrangement, a legal arrangement that would give a man legal heirs, that he knew were his heirs, and he could pass on his private property. And infidelity there was a very big double standard. In that same sort of period, it's said that in the city that I come from, Edinburgh, the brothels in Rose Street were never busier than during the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, where ministers were going there. So there was a very big double standard in sexual conduct then. But again, that legacy of inequality between men and women, around adultery, around infidelity, I think is still here with us. So marriage, of course, has managed to sometimes manages to present itself as if a partnership of equals. But actually, when you look at what happens in the way that people do marriage, inequalities between men and women in heterosexual marriages are still incredibly common. So it's much more often the woman who moves and rearranges her work on marriage when the couple move in together. It's much more often she that downgrades her hours, her career, does more of the domestic work, even when they're in the same profession, even when they've both got degrees from St Andrews. That is more likely to happen. So that something about the fact of calling yourself husband and wife carries a lot of baggage that I think is still a problem. Domestic violence, the rule of thumb was the idea that it's okay to hit your wife as long as the stick's not thicker than your thumb, was again a historical thing. Well, domestic violence is still a big issue. It's still the case that we need refugees for women to escape from their marriages. It has not. We have somehow, even in the 21st century, not managed to totally escape that kind of baggage. So that is one argument why maybe marriage is not the safest route if you want to have a committed, equal relationship. Why call it a marriage? Why go for that? Now let's just think about the recent reform in marriage and how that came about. In 2005, civil partnership came about in Scotland, but it was only for same-sex relationships. Now why did we have civil partnership for same-sex relationships and not marriage? Because actually religious bodies in particular, but not just them, various conservative elements of society still in 2005 thought that marriage was really only appropriate for husbands and wives and should not be afforded to same-sex relationships. And civil partnership was a kind of pretend marriage. And actually same-sex people had campaigned for marriage and instead they got civil partnership. Now, even at the time of that campaign, there was divisions in the lesbian, gay, bisexual community about whether they should be campaigning for marriage or whether marriage in fact had this baggage that they would not be able to put asunder. But they did want equality with heterosexual people and they campaigned for marriage. And when civil partnership was first introduced, people had ceremonies very like marriage, although they couldn't have the religious proper deal because not all churches would allow it. And then it wasn't until 2014 that the Marriage and Civil Partnership Act in Scotland allowed actual marriage for same-sex relationships. And those barriers had been broken down. But then it took a case at the Supreme Court by a heterosexual to say that actually we heterosexuals want to be able to have civil partnerships. We can't have civil partnerships. And the Supreme Court agreed that was an inequality and that actually heterosexual people should be able to have civil partnership. But all along, for a whole category of the society, marriage is the actual, the pinnacle thing. Civil partnership is the down below thing. But actually, a radical element of feminist informed heterosexuals said, no, civil partnership is what we want. We don't want the baggage of marriage. So a second argument is about the way in which the performance of marriage and the celebration of marriage denigrates people who are not married. It somehow does down, it celebrates a form of coupledom that does down other forms of committed intimate relationships to their detriment. It is part of that way of thinking that the pinnacle of your life is to get married. That the pinnacle of it is to be in a particular kind of coupledom. And that actually if you're single, if you're on your own, if you're living alone, somehow there's something sad about you, something lacking about you. Well, that's a really unhelpful way to think about people's lives and relationships, because of course, over a life course, people move in and out of different sorts of situations. People have all kinds of reasons for their circumstances. And what we should be celebrating are committed relationships, kindness to one another, looking after one another, caring for one another, not categories of marriage being the good and everything else less worthy. But something about marriage helps to create that kind of atmosphere around it. And that is another reason why this house opposes marriage. And then finally, I'll just point out that the act of marrying is an incredibly disgraceful act of conspicuous consumption in many cases. I don't know how many of you have been to a wedding lately. Have you been to the hired venue? Have you been to the place where you have to fly to get there? Disgrace. Finished.
Thank the speaker for their excellent address, and I'll cross the floor and give the call to the opposition speaker to give their address and to begin the case for the opposition bench. Hear, hear.
Hi, I want to begin by thanking the President of the Society and also the Board of 10 for inviting me to be here today. I stand before you to defend the institution of marriage, but I must begin by clarifying what I won't be talking about today. I'm here to talk about marriage as a civic institution, not as a religious one. I'm also not here to take a stance on whether a person should marry. Each person has their own unique social needs and the optimal configuration by which they operate. I'm here to talk about marriage as a system and how marriage as a system should not be opposed. Lastly, I'm here to talk about the most common types of marriage, which is between two consenting adults, often of the opposite sex, but also increasingly of the same sex. I'm aware of the many different forms of marriage, including consanguineous marriage or marriage among relatives, child marriage, forced marriage, polygamous, polyandrous marriage, etc. Each one deserves a debate of their own, but today I'm here to talk about your average vanilla marriage between two people. My argument will begin by first defining my parameter for marriage, second, grounds to support marriage on, and then lastly, end with a summary of why marriage should not be opposed. By my definition, marriage is a legal binding act between two individuals to define rights, responsibilities, and entitlement within a conjugal union. It is a legal declaration of a shared fate by which two people jointly document an agreement that they will carry the burden of life together and share the fruit of their labor. Any civil union or registered partnership that outlines these rights and responsibilities, by my definition, falls under the umbrella of marriage, albeit in a different costume. The reason that I see these concepts as interchangeable, because first, we're not discussing religious importance of marriage today, as mentioned earlier. And second, civil union only came about more recently. And it's mainly strictly confined to the Western world. And I'm here to discuss marriage as an institution and concept broadly across cultures. Now that I've defined marriage, I would like to argue in favor of marriage on two grounds: practical functioning and social meaning. The line between the two, which I hope becomes clear after this debate, is that it's blurry. Therefore, my argument in support of one ground may bleed into supporting the other. Ultimately, functions bring meanings, and meanings can become quite functional. Marriage is a setup that offers legal rights and protection to individuals in a stable relationship. Cohabitation provides no legal status to the couple. In the event of the death of a partner or separation, financial claims are limited for cohabiting couples. If one partner becomes hospitalized or incapacitated, and the hospital needs to contact the next of kin, although not legally binding, the person is often considered to be a married spouse or the next closest blood relative. In the event of disagreement with blood relatives, the unmarried partner has less claim over the physical well-being of their loved ones compared to a married partner who is by definition family. The legal rights under protection extends to migration, adoption, inheritance, all of which mark important life decisions and opportunities. The state has no interest in the affairs of the heart. It has public interest in mind. Married people are more likely to be civically involved, less likely to engage in risky behavior. Children are more likely to grow up in a two-parent household if the parents were married rather than cohabiting without marriage, which translates to other positive outcomes for children. The state doesn't know where you're at in your relationship. Through marriage, the level of togetherness is then conveyed, with its collective benefits more measurable. And for the benefits it reaps for the collective, the society then grants rights and protections. More importantly, marriage often protects the welfare of the person who sustains quantifiable loss in wage when they make unquantifiable contributions to the family. This loss is overwhelmingly borne by women upon the birth of a child within a relationship. Without a formalization of an explicit agreement to a shared future and a mechanism for reinforcement, we rely on the good faith of the advantaged partner to be fair. Now, perhaps the audience is more optimistic about human nature than I am, or perhaps my opponent is also more optimistic. But I find that the human mind seems to turn into a self-preserving calculator at breakneck speed as soon as the feel-good hormones subside. What I know is this: we see widespread feminization of poverty across the globe, made up by women living with children born to informal, broken unions. They're doing everything on their own, and the former partner did not play nice. On a lighter note, partnership, with or without marriage, provides a myriad of benefits. However, the activation of some of its most useful functions within a marriage, such as long-term financial stability, sharing of emotional burden, rearing children, often requires a certain level of relationship longevity. Marriage isn't a guarantee for relationship longevity, surprise, surprise, but it carries both a selection effect and serves as a dissolution barrier. By selection effect, I refer to the filtering of couples' invisible relationship qualifiers that ultimately is associated with an elevated probability of the relationship lasting. Although not entirely indicative of relationship quality, extra commitment is required to accept a legal barrier to breakup. It is precisely saying, I will walk through legal fire with you should this not work out. That invisible qualifier shows up in different breakup rates between cohabiting couples versus married couples, with the latter far less likely to break up all around the world. By dissolution barrier, I mean the formalization of relationship is much like setting up an enterprise. Abstractly, that means the enterprise itself becomes an entity to protect, demands work, and is sometimes larger than the sum of its parts. Concretely, relationships have its ups and downs, and sometimes the breaking point for those on the fence can be just tempered by that extra threshold that is divorce, leading to relationship longevity if that crisis becomes averted. The legalization itself thus carries social meanings. Marriage is just a form of relationship definition, and defining the relationship begins as early as sexual interest sparks between two individuals. Clinical psychologists encourage individuals in romantic relationship to have the talk. Are you seeing each other? Are you hooking up? Are you friends with benefits? How should you share time? What's the sleepover schedule? Are you allowed to see other people? It's fair to say a relationship undefined leads to emotional chaos. Marriage defines terms between the couple and those in their social networks that they're embedded in. A girlfriend could be a girlfriend of 2 weeks or one of 7 years. Bringing a girlfriend of 2 weeks or 7 years to Christmas dinner carries different implications than bringing a married partner to Christmas dinner. Like her or not, the family generally expects to see the wife again, in the same chair, on the same day, again next year. These nuances are what makes the social importance of marriage. These cues informed others how to treat your partner. Marriage has been fought for and fought over by many, many people across the globe precisely because it matters. Mixed race couples, same-sex couples, couples of different social classes did not show up on the streets, rain or shine, decades on end across the globe because marriage didn't matter. All over the world, they're in hopes of forming a legal partnership. They stand out there fighting for their fight. Precisely because as an institution, marriage carries functions and meanings that impact the affairs of the purse and heartstring. This is what I understand marriage to be, a legal agreement that carries functions and social meanings. History has seen the evolution of marriage, of who can marry whom, and what the terms entail. By changing terms, I mean women no longer have to get their husband's permission in order to open a bank account, not around here, that is. The terms continue to change according to time and space across geographies. That's a cultural matter. But once again, the society at large does not trouble itself with the affairs of the heart, nor the specific terms marriage entails, I would argue, at least not when you zoom out on human history. It is interested in the stabilization of society from the reduction of social deviance to children growing up under ample resources. Under those parameters, the terms within a marriage and what's deemed acceptable will continue to evolve. It doesn't change the fact that marriage is a self-imposed social signal that carries legal implications for those who strive to live in partnership, raise children, share resources, and have their life course witnessed closely, and all of which form a living experience that continue to be relevant today.
I thank the speaker for their excellent address. Thank you to both speakers for what has been a fantastic debate so far. It's now time to open the debate up to the floor. To catch the chair's eye, please raise your hand. Speeches will be up to 2 minutes in length. I will bang my gavel once your time has expired. Any speeches from the floor? Yes, state your name for the minutes.
Hi, I'm Charlotte, and I have 2 points to make. One is shorter, one is longer. So the first point I'll make is specifically on LGBTQ plus marriage. Which I believe is not a right but a privilege at the moment, as we see in America at the moment, is that we have a lot of debate on whether we can continue to be married in America, whether even multiracial couples can continue to be married in certain states. These are all up for debate, so it isn't a right, it isn't recognised as marriage indefinitely, and I think that's a really big problem. But my main issue with marriage, despite the fact that I see the economic benefits to it, is the fact that it only really prioritises romantic relationships and diminishes the importance of every other relationship. And I will be doing this through the lens of men's mental health, which is the month next month. So we know men struggle with loneliness and they are at a higher risk of suicide. And I think this is due to the institute of marriage to an extent. So when a man gets married and he forms a relationship with a woman, he tends to put a lot of the mental load on his wife. I think in a lot of heterosexual couples, there's a lot of evidence to back this up, is that there is not an equal distribution of emotional labour. So a man would confide in his wife, not in his friends. The relationships formed with his friends or even with his family, the platonic relationships, are diminished because it's seen as this very important romantic relationship which he is legally signed into. So because of that, other issues arise in the marriage, whereas it might not if we were focused more in the public sphere in kinds of friends and sharing emotional labour. And even physical labour, we know that men have an issue with weaponised incompetence, typically in heteronormative relationships as well, particularly in marriage and coming to child rearing, which leaves the wife to build the stain and have more marital issues with the man, which causes further alienation for the man, which leads to worse mental health, worse loneliness, more likely to suffer from depression, but because he relies so heavily on his wife, he doesn't feel that like he can talk about it to anything, which causes more alienation. We know that most domestic abuse victims are women, but I think it's also important to recognise that men also do not benefit from marriage and by further extensions patriarchy. So the higher mental health rates, obviously women struggle with the mental load as well. And I feel like because marriage is seen as this pinnacle of life, you need to get married, whether you are straight or gay, gay at the moment these days, although that's also up for debate. In particularly America, possibly going to come over here as well. But we need to also prioritise other relationships, and that's why I don't think it should be a legal constitution, because other relationships can be just as important and just as supportive, and to bring more into the public life is really important. But yeah, thank you.
I don't remember for the fine floor speech. Any other speeches from the floor? Yes, state your name for the minutes.
Hi. I would just like to address the argument that because marriage has so much historical baggage to it, it is not a good institution itself. Almost every single organization or societal, cultural, political, whatever, in today's society has baggage attached to it driven against minorities, against women. So for example, St. Andrews, women can go to St. Andrews in the 16th century. In the 16th, 15th century, this was a theological school to make priests. But now we have women, people of color, trans students, etc. Just because back in the day women can get education, women can work, women can be politicians, it doesn't mean that those specific roles are bad. It's just that we have to change the way we view them and change access. Today, marriage isn't about giving your daughter to a man. It's about a union of two people. If I get married to someone, I don't have to take their name. They don't own me. I can do whatever I want. Even the man could take my last name if he so chose. So instead of focusing on what was bad 100 years ago, we should think about what has changed. What does that change in that institution tell us today about all the rights we gain, and try to change anything that still today makes that women could potentially be oppressed by that institution.
Sorry, can I have your name for the minutes, please?
Ines.
Ines. Okay, any other speeches from the floor? Yes.
Cara. I take issue with how the opposition speakers started their speech, and this is because they made the statement that they're not critical of people's individual choices. You could choose not to get married. And I think the thing is that that's not true. There exists financial or political or legal reasons as to why marriage is something that is beneficial and is enforced on people in a way that prevents you from making free choices and free decisions. Additionally, there exist cultural pressures to get married that means that individuals are not capable of making that as a free choice. But particularly, I'd like to highlight the financial and legal reasons as to why it's beneficial. Because of all of the reasons why marriage has been declining, there have been pushes from states across the world to put in policies that encourage people to get married, tax breaks, legal pushes that mean that you are valued more when you are a married individual than you are as an individual in your own right. And I think I take issue with that just in and of itself, but I think that it also leads to some difficult, and it leads to individuals not necessarily being free to reject the institution as possible. So when the opposition speaker finished their speech by saying that we should respect the fact that queer people, for example, have been campaigning for marriage for a long time, I raised the counterpoint that, well, what's the alternative? Because when you are offered breaks in tax breaks or advantages as a married individual, it means that if you cannot access those, you are inherently disadvantaged in multiple ways. Therefore, and the proposition speaker has pointed this out already, the reason that the queer community made the conscious decision to advocate for marriage rather than advocate for the dissolution of marriage is because it's easier to tap onto, it's easier to change an institution that already exists than it is to try and dismantle the institution together. And the queer community, for example, was on fighting such a losing battle, fighting an uphill battle, that it makes more sense to try and fit yourself into a heteronormative ideal than it does to try and break down that as a structure in its origins. The second point that I would like to make, and I'll do this briefly, sorry, Paul, is the idea, and I'd just like to draw attention to the fact that divorce rates have skyrocketed, they've increased drastically, and so all of the stability arguments that come from the opposition side, I think, don't stand anyway, because divorce is such a volatile thing that it can not only tear families apart in a way that just two individuals who are cohabiting breaking up could, but it involves that financial, I'll go through hell with you in the legal process in order to separate myself from you. And when the kids are involved, that becomes a damaging process in and of itself. But it also just makes what is already a difficult process of a disillusionment from a romantic relationship all the more difficult because of all of the legal compartments. But additionally, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that there's a severe correlation that exists between the increasing in women's rights and the increasing of divorce rates. And I think that that's something that cannot be ignored by the opposition side, and they have to tell me why that is not something that we should be respectful of. When divorce rates skyrocket because women's rights increase, it is indicative of the fact that marriage is an impressive institution for women, and is an impressive institution that as women are given more opportunities to separate themselves from and advocate for themselves, they access that. And therefore, as a woman, I need to understand why marriage is something that is not going to oppress me.
One honourable member for her floor speech. Any other speeches from the floor? We'll take one from the back and then work it up. State your name for the minutes. The guy in the suit.
Simon.
Yes.
Hello.
Sorry, no, the guy in the suit. Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
My name's Sidney. What I want to say, so whether or not marriage should be endorsed as the norm, as you can see, it's very complicated. What I would like to just raise though is that it is an institution which is deeply important for people of religious persuasions, of various religions, and for people of those persuasions, many of whom have deeply healthy attitudes to relationship dynamics, to the way that society should function, things like patriarchy and so on. A lot of them feel that marriage is the ultimate means by which they can express their faith and their love in synergy. And I don't think that should be opposed. I recognise that in an increasingly secular world, the argument to some extent, it affects other people. But I would like to draw attention to the fact that those of religious persuasions should not be opposed in expressing their love in a way that is conducive with their faith.
I think the member for their floor speech, I'll give the floor speech to the person who's stuck in replacement of the person that I just tried to call on. Stay your name for the minutes.
I'm Simon, and I would just like to say in response to the first speech given opposing marriage, we should criticise it because of, among other things, it's really awful use as an excuse for consuming a lot of things that you're going to throw away and not care about. I completely agree. I've worked as a wedding caterer for about a dozen weddings across Scotland, and the amount of used sausage rolls and plastic knickknacks and God knows what I've had to throw away and go around collecting it. It's been awful. And I completely agree about that. And I agree that a lot of marriages have that. And I agree that a lot of marriages have very patriarchal dynamics where the woman takes the surname of the husband, and there's an unequal division of domestic chores, and the woman tends to murder him more. But I'm also a person whose parents didn't do any of that, whose parents had a wedding reception thing with like 8 people and then went on holiday, and who both wear their wedding rings and share the chores equally, and keep their own surnames, and they're still married. And I think that is possible with marriage, and that's something I'd like to do definitely. And I agree there's a lot of problems with marriage, but I think there are ways to do it better, and we shouldn't abandon the concept.
Members of their floor speech. Any other speeches from the floor? Yes.
Hi, I'm Ariel. I just have one issue which I feel like has been kind of overlooked and I'm deeply concerned about, and it's the correlation of domestic violence with marriage. I come from a country, New Zealand, with a very high rate of domestic violence, but mainly in partnerships that are not legally binding. And I think it's very easy to say, oh, it's equivalent because it's a old institution that's locked in, but when it comes to any form of abuse, it will happen no matter what. It's often a community thing, in the case of my country. It's often tied to alcoholism and other issues. And I think when we go, oh, marriage is an issue because look at the high divorce rate, look at the fact that people are falling out, look at domestic violence, I think we're actually trying to blame a title on what's actually an institutional societal problem. And if you're going to say to push for equal rights, we should destroy every institution and level it out, you're not actually getting rid of it, you're just getting rid of the label. So I think it's actually much more important to re-envision what it is we're getting rid of. And I think it's a bit of a cop-out, frankly. Unhealthy relationships and the issue we find in our modern day generation of people not wanting to be in long-term committed relationships speaks much more to a mental health epidemic than it does the title marriage or the system of patriarchy. Thank you.
I have a member for the floor speech. Any other speeches from the floor? Yes, state your name for minutes in the postgraduate row in the first row.
Hi, my name is Ben. I felt that one of the issues the proposition failed to justify this general confinement of the discussion of marriage to what we describe as the Western model of marriage, or even Western-influenced weddings, speaking of excesses and consumption, and failing to acknowledge that marriage is also manifest and expressed in different forms and ways and means across the globe, including cultures where surnames are not changed. And myself, I got married in a garden on a budget, probably smaller than that of the St. Andrews Union Debating Society's operating budget. It would have been, I appreciated the opposition speaker bringing up the concept of social meaning, and it would be really nice to see a bit of debate around that concept and the idea of social meaning invested into marriage and what is lost if the institution of marriage is taken away. I also appreciate the opposition speaker's acknowledgement that the terms, norms, and customs of marriage evolve, but the institution can still remain. And I feel that this weakens some of the opposition's characterization of the ills of marriage and limiting it to what can be observed in the here and now, instead of taking a broader view into the past, maybe into the future, and across a variety of cultures and geographies. Thank you.
Member for their fine floor speech. Any other speeches on the floor? I'm not missing anyone with a hand up. Oh, sorry, I can't see because Flynn's so tall. State your name for the minutes.
I'm Eva. So before I get into the main point of this speech, I am the child of a twice divorced mother who raised 2 children practically on her own. And I have seen the way that divorce has kind of destroyed my family over and over again. The way that the idea that the opposition speaker has brought up that divorce is I'll walk through hell with you, but the way that long legal hell battle drove my mother into a pit of depression that she has not got out of to this day. The way that she cannot interact with me or her daughter because we remind her of her ex-husbands. It is a societal ill, I think, to the divorce laws stand the way they are, especially in places where there is no-fault divorce. I think that it's a difficult thing. But on that note, I am also recently engaged, and so to my lovely partner right here. And I think that for us, marriage is not a something that it traps either of us. I think it's because of the way I was raised. I have a lot of issues with fearing someone was going to leave me without there being a real meaningful social attachment to it. I think that for him to say every day, this is something that I want us to have, and this is something that I want to have every day in the future, whether or not it has a legal meaning to it, I think that it proves in the future that we will still be together, even if it isn't always easy. Because of that legal meaning, I don't have a fear that he's going to just leave in the middle of the night. Thank you.
for their fine floor speech and congratulate them on their engagement. Any other speeches from the Yes, we'll give the final call to...
I'd like to address two small points before getting on to the main point of my speech. Firstly, I'd just like to say that I'm also the child of a thrice divorced father and a twice divorced mother. And while their divorces weren't quite as painful, most of the time, I believe the first one possibly, as Neva's, I can see that divorce is definitely a problem that causes a lot of strife among the people going through it. But I do also want to recognise, and coming through into my main point of the speech, I guess, that a lot of the arguments brought up, and this does echo some of the floor speeches, that a lot of the opposition arguments a lot of the proposition arguments made are tangential to the institution of marriage, such as like uneven workloads, such as uneven workloads and domestic abuse. And I'd also like to say that a lot of the opposition arguments like go the same way, like the idea of a stable partnership, the idea of having a good home for children, a lower breakup rate, that sort of thing. Both of these are generally quite symmetric. There probably is just a correlation between people who get married and people who are unlikely to break up. I'd like to believe that the two of us are going to be stable, that we won't break up, that we will go on and we'll be there at the end of everything else, even if it wasn't for the ring on my finger. And I think that what a ring does provide as a new record is a sense of stability, a sense of knowledge that the other person definitely wants this as much as I do. I think that, therefore, when we consider what difference marriage does provide, I think that we ought not to look at just general partnerships as they're laid out in homosexual relationships. Just generally laid out as they are in heterosexual relationships. And I think that the homosexual argument does actually provide a good counter to this, because the uneven workload, the patriarchal relationships that they get into is undermined by the fact that marriage does apply to people who aren't in heterosexual relationships, because it's clear that marriage can be this even, a more even partnership, can be a much better thing in a different context, in a changed context when people don't see it in the way that we've always seen it in the past. And that is why we should vote for the opposition.
Speech and also congratulate them on their engagement. Okay, yeah, I will give the final word because, she puts in a lot of work. So I will give the final word to
Thank you.
the lovely lady there.
I'm not engaged. No, sorry.
Stay
Jenny. Oh, sorry, I'm Jenny. Oh! It's too much for one evening, too much. No, I just wanted to touch on a point that I think hasn't been kind of like fully realised, which was mentioned by one of the speakers, which is the idea at the moment of having a marriage of completely unequal partners, and that is to say a marriage between someone who's of a legal consenting age, which is currently 16. And I fail to see how, I agree with what Ines said about changing the institution. I think marriage is an institution that can be changed, and that we've seen that, and that's something that will continue to change, and that it can change and look and be like in many different ways, and it changes depending on the culture, depending on the individual, depending on the religion, and numerous other factors. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of this idea of marriage between equal partners, particularly with a 16-year-old, and that we should be opposing that at the moment. There's an ongoing case, I'm sure many people have seen in the media, with Russell Brand, and the idea of people campaigning for staggered consent, and that actually at 16 you may be able to consent to lots of things, but marriage isn't one of them. And what we've heard about the complications of divorce, which is the legal parameters which are so difficult, trapping somebody in that kind of environment, which is possibly unhealthy. So I wanted maybe if in the responses we could talk a little bit about the idea of this marriage of unequal partners, and how we can reconcile that with supporting marriage between a 16-year-old and someone who's potentially much older. Thank you.
The fine floor speech. We're going to have to leave it there, but it's now time to bring the debate back to the dispatch boxes. Each bench has a total of 10 minutes to give their reply, and first of all, we'll go to the opposition speaker to give their reply first. Here.
Thank you for all the comments on the floor, and I appreciate that we have individuals using this occasion to flirt as well. So I want to point out that I believe that several individuals from the floor, and also my opponent, are conflating gender inequality with marriage. And I think that marriage, as Vanessa Ines has pointed out that marriage can be what you want it to be, at least given that I mentioned in my intro that I'm not talking about forced marriage. And I understand that there are cultures where 14-year-old girls are married to their 35-year-old uncles. I'm talking about marriage more broadly as an institution. It's flexible. Even in the societies where the 14-year-olds are married to their 35-year-old uncle, there could be change. And we're talking about marriage as an institution, a concept broadly. And I think there is no need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That what we are opposing, such as domestic violence, patriarchy, waste, the circus that's wasting, that's weddings, all these things don't need to come as a package with marriage. It's the fact that a lot of people do marriage that way, but increasingly also people are not. And I think it's very difficult to say that you want to oppose an entire institution because some people do it very poorly. So that's my argument for that. And then second, just back to gender inequality. I see every day people do marriage in ways that I personally disagree with. I believe that the powers are imbalanced in a lot of couples. And that's a very tricky part in terms of arguments because that's sort of micro level of how individuals decide to do their relationship within household level. So I encourage you to think about opposing marriage from a more macroscopic level, where we think about whether or not it is good to have an institution where as this pretty nice lady in the classes mentioned earlier, that you don't have to, it is a signal of someone saying that I'm not going to run away in the middle of the night. And when we talk about the hellfire that is divorce, and I completely agree that we've heard so many stories about just terrible divorces, but they're fighting for something. They're fighting for what they deserve out of the marriage, whereas there are people that are not married, literally the partner ran out in the middle of the night and they don't get anything. And this is a part of the legal protection that I'm talking about, that although divorce can be really, really hard and drawn out and painful, there is something to fight for. There is some sense of justice to, out of these 15 years of my life or 25 years out of my life, what I don't get to walk away with nothing because I quit my job for the family, and I don't get to walk away with nothing because I moved to St. Andrews with you for your work. So I think these things are actually not, we're not disagreeing that much about in terms of how difficult breakups can be, but I don't think it's actually better if the legal process is not there. Then finally, I just want to reiterate that although divorce is increasing among certain groups, if you look at individuals that marry, let's say age 30 or older, it's actually quite stable. They're not increasing all that much, and the later that you marry, the lower the divorce rate. So there is something about people taking time and consideration and to grow as individuals, then make a more lifelong match. I don't think that actually speaks to the fact that that marriage becomes irrelevant because if women have the power to, they would divorce. They would divorce under current framework of gender inequality. And what I want to argue is that we don't have to do marriage that way. And I want to encourage individuals to think about marriage as an institution, as a flexible institution, and why the society should support it, because it does offer macro level benefits. And when you talk about household level negotiation, that's down to the individuals. It's down to what we tell children of what they deserve and how they deserve to be treated in relationships, and then how they negotiate what's fair for them in their partnership. Thank you.
I thank the opposition speaker for their excellent reply. I now call the proposition speaker to give their reply and the final speech of this debate. Hear, hear.
So I accept, of course, that some people here may well have happy marriages. They may well have managed to have a marriage of equals. They may well have managed to do something that's quite magic between them. However, that does not, to me, amount to a defence of the institution of marriage. And I will stick to my proposition that this House wishes to abolish marriage. And part of the reason, of course, is because the institution itself remains. You can't have it both ways. You can't have it as an institution and just a label. Actually, it's always embedding itself as an institution. And so let me just try to explain that once again. I mean, take another extreme example. I'm not suggesting marriage is like slavery, but you could have a slave-owner relationship and be a very kindly person to that slave. You could allow that slave all kinds of privileges. Okay, so marriage can become an individualized arrangement that's not honouring, if you like, the institutional baggage. But that institutional baggage doesn't go away unless there's an enormously critical mass of people doing that. And I submit to you that at the moment that is just not the case. Okay, you can say we've made lots of progress, and yes, maybe we have, but actually maybe we'd make a lot more if we started again with a different institution. As I said at the beginning, civil partnership has all of the legal, functional protections that the opposition speaker spoke of as part of the reason for wanting an institution of marriage. Civil partnership has all of that, but it doesn't have the same baggage. It doesn't result in people sneering about people who are not in civil partnerships as not quite as good as them. It doesn't have the kind of history that is still echoed in myriads of ways around you when you are married. People who are married have respect of a different sort because they are married. We're not changing that. So yes, I've been speaking about a very Western, Euro-American kind of marriage, but actually, if you look at marriage broadly, more cross-culturally, it doesn't look better. So India is the country with the highest proportion of the population married, the youngest age of marriage, and it is a country in which it's almost impossible for a woman to live on her own because she would be so abused, she would have to suffer so much, it's just so difficult, just so really difficult. That is because of marriage. It's not because of not being married, it's because the institution of marriage has made it in that way, the way that the institution of marriage has been framed, the way it is an institution and a label, and the way that those two are completely intermeshed. The age of 16 is not an age at which anyone should be getting married, and actually it's not legally now possible to do that in England. But in Scotland that has not yet been changed. And you might remember there used to be marriages at Gretna Green where it was possible for people to elope from England and get married there because in Scotland you could get married at a younger age without parental consent than in England and Wales where you had to be 21. Well, you can't do that any longer because in England they've stopped. They've had a minimum age act in 2020, I think. And we have not yet reformed it in Scotland, and we should, absolutely should. It is open to abuse, but actually it's also open to arranged marriage. Parents can arrange a marriage for their children at age 16. Now, I don't believe arranged marriage is any more to be denigrated than the kind of Euro-American marriage. I think you can have a very happy arranged marriage that is not, it's not an institution that's any more suspect an arranged marriage than a marriage of choice. But both are flawed institutions that are creating inequalities and difficulties, and particularly so for women. So I ask you to support the motion that this House votes to abolish marriage.
excellent reply. Thank you to all members of the House who have contributed to this fine debate. It's now time to call the House to a vote. So, please raise your hand nice and high if you saw the proposition, i.e. that you oppose marriage. Okay, please raise your hand if you side with the opposition, i.e. that you do not oppose marriage. Great, my partner's got their hand Any abstentions?
Liberals.
Okay, so before the votes are being announced, Jenny, would you like to go first with board announcements?
Hi, my name is Jenny. Alex was our sergeant. Oh gosh. Hello. And myself organise all of these events that happen every Thursday night from 7:30 onwards in this building. Next week we've got a really exciting motion as well, which is this house believes that classical music is elitist. And we've got some really good... Yeah. I love it when that happens. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I hope you can all join us for that one as well. We also have our motions meeting in a few weeks' time, which is where we decide on our motions for the next semester, i.e. what we're going to be debating every week. If you're interested in putting your name forward for a motion, as in you want to submit a question that you think you would like us to debate, we've got a QR code over there in which you can scan and do that. And if there's a particular debate that you would like to see us run, then that's the best way to let us know. Thank you for coming. It's great to see so many people here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm William. Oh, God. I help with competitive debating here, so if you're interested in debating like these great debaters here, we run training every Wednesday at 2 to 5, top floor of the Union. If you're more interested in the competitive aspects of debating, we are running an internal program, not this weekend, but next weekend, where we're going to be partnered up with a pro. Good luck, and you'll have an enjoyable experience in a weekend. So talk to Neva if you're interested in that. Thirdly, we also host, or at least send people to competitions externally, like Bogwall, which is the annual Scottish novice competition. Once again, talk to Neva if you're interested in attending. It's free. Yeah.
I'm really not enjoying the camera slowly coming towards me, or the fact that that's better. Hi everyone, I'm Freddie. I'm the steward to the house, the fancy name for our social secretary. We will be going, as we do every week after our debate, to Sandy's Bar, where you'll be able to have a drink and a discussion of tonight's debate. The invitation is, of course, always open to our wonderful speakers, and I hope they'll be able to join us for some informal conversation and some good drinks and company. If you don't know where Sandy's Bar is, I'll wait outside the hall for about 5 minutes afterwards and I will lead the way. If you do know where it is, meet me there. I don't know what you're saying, Parth. Oh, yes, and also we'll be doing a little fun social after next week's competitive debate training, so that'll be about 5 o'clock, top floor of the Union, and we'll be playing some board games and some other quite fun, chilled-back stuff. Any questions about any of the social stuff, come speak to me. I'll be at the Union.
To announce one of her leaflets. Just another board announcement from me. We have our EGM next Wednesday at 2 p.m. on the top floor of the Union. We have 4 positions available. Clerk to the House, which is what Flynn's currently doing, and other things as well. Public Debate Secretary, so you'll be sitting on Public Debates Board with Jenny and Alex, and helping to organise all these debates. We also have Schools Outreach Officer, and we can talk more to Jack about her interacting with the schools and our competitive programme. And finally, our Freshers representative as well, who will sit on the competitive board. Okay, great. Lynn, did you...
Okay, so I want to just say with my other hat, so I also am a member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and the last time I took part in a debate here, it was on that topic, which was actually in the 1980s, and it was an interesting event. And you were still singing Gaudium et Igitur at that point, so I'm very disappointed in you for not still singing it. No, I'm not really. And I can't shut my phone up. But, so I want you to know about an event on the 4th of November in Glasgow on a Saturday called the Festival for Survival, which is about bringing together environmental movements and peace movement, and trying to look forward and do something pretty constructive in Scotland. So there's speakers, workshops, cultural events, films, so on. So if you're at all interested, please take a leaflet. Also about tonight, I wanted to say that I could have spoken on either side. That's not to say that I didn't believe what I said, but I would have just been just as happy speaking the other way as well, if you can make any sense of that. That's a sociologist for you. We're always on two sides. So anyway, thank you very much, and I hope to see you again at some point.
Great, thank you. Now to announce the results of the debate. We've had 67 votes cast, and the ayes to the right are 10, and the nays to the left are 52, with 5 abstentions. Therefore, congratulations to the opposition bench for winning the race.